All right, you should be good to go.
All right, sounds good. So, welcome everyone. My name is Tony Bailey. I'm State Conservation Agronomist. Today, moderator will be Stephanie McLean, assisting with questions and that, and a little bit on some polls and things like that. So, also, if you have other issues, challenges, please type those in the chat. I'm not able to easily follow those as I'm presenting, but hopefully she'll be able to keep up with those. So this morning, we're going to talk about water management, sediment management for water quality and water bodies. So just to make sure we're kind of all on the same page, you know, not self-explanatory. We're going to look at water management a little bit from the drainage and irrigation standpoints. A little bit related to national and also Indiana. Sediment management, yes, it's always in there related to erosion. How that sedimentation affects us offsite be included in there as well. And then how all of those things impact the water bodies, the receiving end of those, what's going on across the landscape. And we'll also sprinkle in a little bit related to conservation planning, soil health, weather, climate, and probably a few other things. So the challenge, I think, is that we know it precipitates. That infiltrated precipitation is either discharged via drainage tile or bypasses into the water table. What doesn't infiltrate runs off the land. Lack of infiltration causes erosion and runoff. It carries the various sediment, nutrients, agrochemicals. If it's too dry every now and then, if we're able to, we're going to turn on a sprinkler to help it out. And then the resulting sediment fills up the ditches, streams, rivers, ponds, and lakes. To me, that pretty much boils down what we're going to talk about today. Nothing too different there, but just trying to think about it. Could probably, you know, maybe call it a day, but we won't. Still got a few more slides. Continue on. So a couple of things I wanted for us to think about today is how we work with all this in an environmental setting, and that there's different perspectives, how we come at this, people come at this differently. We want to do what we can to infiltrate more of that precipitation, more of that water into the soil, and as much as possible using those soil health practices that we hold so close and dear to our hearts. And then also want to do what we can to store a larger percentage of that water on the landscape longer. We don't want to release it, increase the chances of flooding downstream. We want to hold it there all across that landscape. And then again, obviously, hopefully, this is what we do, programs we provide, doing what we can to make sure that we're developing those plans, making those seasonal, yearly tweaks, and then those improvements. And hopefully that's fitting in within that realm of conservation planning. And then doing what we can to improve all of those different use efficiencies, the soil, water, nutrient, and energy. And all these things, as we know, just kind of spiral there together and impact each other together.
If it needs. Sometimes this creek might not cool. It needs some of this.
All right, so agricultural production, and this is one of those things that I think about is just sitting there, one of those you know, weights on the shoulder as far as agriculture, you know, where we're needing to produce more. And so what are some of those challenges that are out there? And I think these kind of boil down to, we know some of the trends related to population, how many more billion we're supposed to have by the year 2030, the year 2050, more mouths to feed. How we utilize the land. We are fortunate and blessed living in the United States that we have this breadbasket, that we have these wonderful soils, how we utilize them. Do we continue to build more subdivisions and strip malls and bypasses to the bypasses? Every road we put in, splits farm fields. And so how all of that, how do we get more out of the land that we have left? And we know we talk about those things intricately, especially related to soil health. What do we use those corn and soybeans that we harvest in the fall? What are we using them for? Are we able to use? Are we using those for ethanol or biodiesel? But are we pulling those off of some of the most productive ground that we have? If we're not, then we know we're causing other environmental challenges, environmental issues. Our nutrient availability and production. It takes a lot of energy to produce the nitrogen. We've got to ship and barge the phosphorus from Florida and other places. So how that is all being utilized. And then another thing that's just kind of sitting out there pressing on us in the back of our minds is these extreme weather events and how that's impacting. So all these challenges kind of come together and push us on how we're doing this. I think this is a piece that we've fortunately we're paying more attention to now. I know when I first started, we talked about soil, water, plants, animals, and humans. The humans part of it was trying to work with the producer, the landowner, trying to get them to make changes. I think we've done a much better job here in the last few years thinking about these perspectives, these social indicators. And I think it's something we need to just continue to think about. There's, as we know, just so many sources of data, information, news, whatever the case might be. How are we involved with those? How do we influence those? How do we help people get the data, the references, the things they need from us or reliable sources related to us? Can't ignore the economics aspect of it. Sometimes people look at this all differently. Sometimes it's how much are they going to save on something, and sometimes it's how much is it going to cost them. What's that return on investment? Is it still profitable? All these things have to fit in. We can't have people going out of business if they're implementing a practice that is great for the environment, but isn't making them money, isn't saving them money, or something like that. Some producers come at it from totally a production standpoint. How many acres they farm is a great sense of pride for some people, as we know. And some it's bushels per acre, and then some it's return on investment per acre. So it's a little different for each person, and having to pick and choose how we're talking with those producers comes in there. Helping them to think about climate resiliency. Hopefully that's a piece that more producers are pulling in. We know some of the top soil health farmers we work with, they've been thinking about this since, prior to the drought of 2012. This has been something on their mind and implemented for a long time. Another thing I think that kind of fits in here is we have terms. How do we define these terms? Conservation, sustainability, regenerative. These terms are thrown around a lot. We've used them. A lot of them, fortunately, are getting included in different business models and that, especially sustainability piece. Hopefully that's helpful to us, but I think it can also be a little bit confusing. Company A's definition of sustainability is different than Company B and might be different than what we think of sustainable. And there's also this piece of working with the landowners and producers, owners, about how they think about their land. Are they a phase of their life where they're thinking about the legacy part of it, what they're passing along to their kids and grandkids? What is their conservation ethic? What do they really think and hold dear to their heart related to the things that we try and work on every day? And so with that, how do we appeal to them in a different level sometimes? We're trying to promote wildlife across the landscape, and sometimes it might be, well, when was the last time you saw a covey of quail out here, or do you like to hunt rabbits, or where do you fish at, or did you used to be able to fish in the creek and now you're not able to? And then also pulling in on that, the other people there, the wives, the kids, what else are they interested in? So just try to pull on those pieces, and hopefully that gets a little more conservation across the landscape. And unfortunately, I probably should have put this even in smaller letters, the environmental aspect, the regulations, water quality, water quantity are kind of there. Don't want to use those as a big hammer, but those are still there. And unfortunately, sometimes that's what's needed. But hopefully we don't have to use that very often, and we're thinking about that in a different way. So switching gears just a little bit, what we're going to do today is it's going to be a combination of 5 different courses from 8 different national and state subject matter experts. These are the courses that were in AgLearn. I counted it up. There were 234 slides in about 3 hours worth. We're only going to have about 230 slides, so we've cut it down. No, I'm kidding. We have fewer slides than that. We'll get by. We'll be done by noon. But I took a pretty high cut on some of this, and really emphasizing the agronomics pieces of it, some of the soils, but not so much on the engineering. Engineering will be mentioned in that, but really hitting on the agronomics. That's what I'll present on. These AgLearn PDFs, if you're interested in them, we can post some of them, possibly post them later. Also encouraging, I'll touch on this a little bit as we go along. If there's a course that you're really interested in, you want to go into more detail on, by all means, go take it. But we also know part of this is to meet the certified conservation planning requirement. So we talk about water quality related to our conservation planning, and it fits into everything we do, all the resource concerns and all pieces of that. When I think about this, it's kind of hard for me to separate out. Everything is so interconnected, whether it's the surface water, the runoff, going to a tile riser, coming out in a ditch, a stream, the outlet, and then where does our water flow here in Indiana? We know we're mostly going to, probably going to the Mississippi River Basin, or we're going to one of the Great Lakes. And so if we're talking about the Gulf, the water that ends up there, we're thinking about hypoxia issues in particular, and especially in the northeast corner of the state, the water that we send to Lake Erie, potential concerns related to blue-green algae, but wouldn't limit to blue-green algae to just Lake Erie. We know that our reservoirs also have some of those challenges as well. When I think about all these, where the water flows, the nutrients, the sediments, and then how we're going to attempt to address those through the various programs, initiatives, whatever we have, and all those various mechanisms that we have to do that based on our resource concerns, our various planning criteria associated with all of them, our CARD assessments, and just basic conservation planning and implementation of our field office tech guide standards. So how all that comes together and how you all do that so well. When we think about water quality, we need to think about hydrology, and so I think we're all hopefully very familiar with this. Where as the water moves through throughout the whole system, there's potential of moving those various nutrients, and then unfortunately sediments and that along with that. We'll get into more details on some of this. So we're talking about the water cycle, and part of that is recycling water. So I'll recycle a few questions from previous. And so what is the average amount of precipitation for Indiana? Part of it is I saw the answers on here, but they're supposed to be on there for you. What is the average amount of precipitation for Indiana? Let you answer a few of those or think about them a little bit. Write it down on the side. How many inches a year average do you think we get? Also, of this precipitation, on average, about what percent evaporates, what percent runs off, what percent makes it past that as makes it to groundwater recharge. So this is I think it's a real nice way of showing the water budget for Indiana. This is this reference is from Indiana Water Resource Book, 1980. Some of you have looked at it before. Might still be sitting on your shelf in your office. It's one of the big brown thick books there, maybe in the reference section. Lots of information in there. Obviously, 1980, a little bit dated. Sorry about that, a little bit more dated than I like it to be. But anyways, so back in 1980, the answer was 38 inches precipitation. What's interesting is since that time now, the average is about 42 inches. So it's interesting how that has changed in about 40 years. And then based on these numbers, again, from 1980, the answer for the percent of evaporation, runoff, and infiltration to groundwater is 68, 24, and 8. So just always think that's something to keep in mind. All right. So this is another piece that, you know, when we talk about the infiltration part of it, what percent is infiltration, what part's runoff, we've hopefully seen and done these lots. We're trying to do everything we can to get more of that water to infiltrate, less of it to run off. And then what does infiltrate, you know, what percent of it makes it to groundwater, and what percent of that is broken or interrupted and ends up in a tile or an open ditch or something like that. And I still say part of that challenge is some of our tile water or our surface risers and that, what percent of it, what amount of it is true tile water, and what amount of it is some sort of surface water. And so if water's not able to infiltrate, you know, water bypasses, goes to a blowhole or suck hole, and you know, gets into the tile, and you know, still that. Unfortunately, those blowholes or suck holes are that hidden form of erosion that we usually don't account for. But you know, there's still that question of I hear people talk about tile water. It's one of the first things that pops into my head. Is it true tile water, or how much is surface water influencing that?
Hey, Tony.
Yes, Stephanie.
Oh my, I did not even know that you were going to pop up a question comment slide. I was just going to let you know that we had a few questions in the chat. Going back to that slide that you showed from 1980, looking at the amount of evaporation, runoff, and infiltration, some of the people attending are kind of curious if those numbers, if those are still numbers from 1980, or if percentages of evaporation, runoff, and infiltration have changed as well from 1980.
Yeah, those numbers are out of 1980, and I've not seen an update on this related to the 42 inches of precipitation, and if evaporation or runoff or groundwater recharge has changed from that time. I've wondered that as well. You know, you would sort of, I guess, I could sort of wonder since 1980 if our soils have degraded more since then. Would we possibly have more runoff and even less going towards groundwater recharge? I don't know. I just guess that.
Or even with temperature changes,
Sure, yeah.
Do we have increased evaporation? And then the other thing is when they talk about groundwater here, that's actually referring to the actual amount, percentage-wise, of groundwater that's infiltration, right? Everything else that we're talking about here is not infiltration.
Yeah, and so it is a little bit, and so there's another thing that says groundwater recharge, you know, 3 to 4 inches per year. So I assume that that is bypassing the tile. And so, that 9-inch runoff number on there, could include tile and pure surface runoff.
True. And if it evaporates, it has to be infiltrated or in the soil to evaporate as well. So, or in a reservoir. So. All right, we're getting some good questions, or at least discussion about how flooding has increased in certain areas of the state. That there's that agreement, something that we can all agree upon. That we're seeing more intense rainfall events, that we're seeing increased flooding. All of these things that we know and have been measured to be the case, that these things are changing over time. Other than that, you can pause a minute, Tony, if you want, and see if anyone raises their hand or unmutes their mic.
Yeah, all fair, all good comments. I'm not able to see the chat, and that's fine. And I'll touch on some of these things a little bit more. And I realize that sometimes during these presentations, that chat is just like going to a meeting or training session in person. Sometimes those conversations in the hallway are more important. You get more out of those than you actually do out of the presenter. So yeah, by all means. All right.
Looking good, Tony. Nothing else here, so
okay.
Continue on.
Well, sounds good. All right, so we'll continue on. So what I want to do now is switch gears just a little bit, or talk a little bit about drainage water quality. This was a little heavy on engineering. We'll do engineering light and throw some agronomic in here. Drainage of ag land, very important. It's been important for production, but this is a nice map to show us, what percent of the county as was drained, various places. Obviously, across the Midwest and that. Much more so than other parts of the country. Think about that resource concerns related to water quality. Touched on these things a little bit already. The hypoxia and the what happens in the Gulf of Mexico. All that drainage water from Indiana. Thinking about the average annual nitrogen load in streams, and I think we've seen some of these maps before. When the watershed average is 2.6 pounds per acre. That doesn't sound too bad. But then you look on those reds, and those are 16 to 27 pounds of nitrogen per acre. When you start thinking about it, for corn crop, we put on, about 200 pounds. So, we're losing about 10%. A lot of times, we think of that as being pretty good, but in these biological systems, we're trying, that hurts us. So that's the thing we're trying to do, is to tweak all these things to, try and decrease the amount that we're lost, try and get more of those nutrients within the crop itself. And we'll hit on some of those things. We talked about those things in the past too, but we'll hit on a few of those things again today. And mentioned this a little bit already about the Great Lakes water quality issues, and it doesn't matter which of the Great Lakes you're talking about. They all have various challenges, and nutrient sedimentation. The Great Lakes are they're one of the largest natural water bodies. I mean, the unsalted water bodies in the world. So it seems like it should be pretty important that we do what we can to preserve and protect them, and that's what we attempt to do every day. So we think about this water quality management. Think about it in a systems approach. This avoid, control, trap, this act. And this is something that we've not emphasized overly here in Indiana, but I think other states have continued to utilize these. And so, but anyways, I'm just trying to pick out those various conservation practices that impact all of these three things. And we'll hit on those a little bit more as we go along as well. But we're talking about drainage. The golden rule of drainage is only release the amount of water necessary to ensure trafficable conditions for field operations and to provide an aerated crop root zone. It all makes sense. We're trying to do what we can to avoid compaction out there. don't want to mud up the fields, don't want to rut up the fields. And then also knowing that any of that excess drainage water is carrying potential other nutrients and things related to that. A variety of practices that we can utilize related to improving water quality with drainage. We know cover crops do a nice job, nutrient management, drainage water management. Then there's a few other engineering practices here. We'll talk about all these a little bit. So when we look at all of these, they all have different impacts related to nitrate reductions. And of course, all of these, the answer is going to be it depends based on what practice you're implementing, how long it's been there. Is it the first year of the practice? Is it the 5th? Is it the 10th year? What type of cover crops? What aspect of nutrient management? All those different pieces and parts related to that. But just on average here, cover crop reductions, 20% nitrate reduction, nutrient management 25%, and drainage water management upwards to 40%. So a little bit of work out of Ames, Iowa, about the various reductions from a rye cover crop versus no cover crop, and overall it's a 58% reduction. And so it's kind of one of those things even I wondered about when I looked at this. The first few years we got a bigger reduction. Was that because there was other nitrate in the soil, or and by the further on the right, have we started to put more of that nitrate into soil organic matter and it's being held tighter? I don't know. Is it based on completely on climatic, on weather events and how much water we ran through? Yeah, there's a lot to do with that too. So lots of different things on here, but in all cases, we saw a reduction with the cover crop. So very beneficial. And then some other work done with the Iowa Soybean Association, various practices, and then the note in the big red there that these weren't necessarily to our practice criteria, but they implemented some form of these, some function of these, and they got various nitrogen removals with those. And it's always interesting. It's always challenged where those different practices fit across the landscape, where they fit better. And then there's also barriers to implementing them. Some are very expensive to implement. Some are large. Some are, take a lot of extra work to implement, and some are something that are much easier. Drainage water management is one that we've talked about. Trying to do what we can to hold the water back and to keep it from releasing. Trying to end up raising the water level, the water table levels for a certain period of time, and then we let that water level down before we get ready to plant, and then we might increase that water level during the growing season to make sure we're pulling boards or whatever else out so that we can get in there and harvest when we need to. So some interesting benefits of that. It's just a nice map showing potential cropland suitable for this practice. And you look down here, bottom left, Indiana, it says about 5 million acres. At the same time, you've got to have the field set up right, got to be able to put the structures in. But this is one of those things, especially when we're getting, people are going in, putting in, replacing some of the aging infrastructure, some of the aging tiles that we have out there. Even if they don't put this practice in now, hopefully they're setting it up so they can. You hate for somebody to go in and put a brand new tile system in, and then, they didn't quite do something to allow them to do drainage water management later if they wanted to. Whether it's through one of our programs or on their own or whatever the case might be. So hopefully that's in the thought process. And I know that Mike and other engineers have done a real good job of talking with Indiana Leica and trying to promote some of these things with them. And some producers or some of the contractors have it more in their mindset and the thought process with the farmers when they're installing than others. But some good stuff, that potential out there. Also related to denitrifying bioreactors, you know, digging the hole, putting the wood chips in. Differences of, we think there's differences what types of wood chips, the softwood, the hardwood, and then you know that it does remove nitrate from the field tiles. We gotta make sure that we don't, you know, back up water in there. It still has to, you know, be able to flow water out, able to do 30 to 100 acre drainage areas. And so this is probably one of those things where you want to try and identify. One of the challenges is trying to identify some of those hot spots in there. You know, if you've got a place that just, you know, we're already pretty efficient with our nitrogen inputs, well, maybe this isn't as big of an issue. But if we're, you know, where we've got livestock at, we're having to apply manure, well, maybe this is something that you need to think about a little bit more. And then there's the lifespans, how long these things last, and you know, it varies with operation and maintenance, and kind of a little bit on the different wood chips and that too. There's some differences related to that. We start thinking about all this. There's a how much does it cost for each of these practices to install, and then how many pounds of nitrogen are we removing? And so some of these have a pretty hefty price tag. At the same time, you know, they're in for 10 or 15 years. You put them in once, and they do a pretty nice job. You know, so the bioreactor there from, you know, $2.50 to almost $5 per pound of nitrogen. You know, you start looking at that, it looks a lot better than the fall cover crop at, you know, cost estimate of $11 per pound of nitrogen. And so one of the things I thought was interesting when I looked at this was, you know, the other values that you get from putting this practice in. If all they're looking at was the cost of nitrate removal, well, yeah, the fall cover crop doesn't look as good. But we also know that it reduces erosion. Well, what's that worth? You know, so it's probably need for a total cost benefit analysis on here, and I'm sure we'd have economists that would love to dig into that. But you know, so all these have different values, and we need to think about those. The tough part is that, you know, some of these don't actually pay, you know, or reduce any inputs or anything for the farmer. And so in some of those cases, we've had discussions, should we pay for a larger percentage, you know, if we're going to install a bioreactor or a wetland versus a cover crop? You know, if we're trying to get, if society says that we need to do those other things and we're trying to go for that last, you know, 30%, 20% of a environmental pollution type issue, then should we be willing to pay a little bit more for that? And so those are some different discussions that happen occasionally. And then also, you know, these are fairly new as far as our use of them, and as research, you know, continues to look at how we can make them better, what type of wood chips, but then also what other media, such as biochar or other things, can be added in there to help them be more efficient and to pull up more of the nutrients. And then we've got this other piece of restoring, enhancing, or creating wetlands, and you know, just doing what we can to hold more water on the landscape permanently, or also assisting with some of these extreme weather events. You know, does that mitigate some of the downstream flooding? Well, we sure hope so. But at the same time, we get some of the other wonderful water quality benefits and wildlife benefits out of having these back on the landscape. So how these fit, where these fit, it takes a special producer, it takes a special landowner to want to implement these, but they do have some great potential. And then I thought it was also real interesting and happy to see that they included this agricultural conservation planning framework, this ACPF from Mark Tomer out of INNRCS out west. And just this ability to go across the landscape and look and see which practices, you know, in a GIS way, fit and where they fit, where they might fit. And then so hopefully if we have a special emphasis or initiative that we want to try and promote some practices, that you're able to see, well, which of these might fit across a watershed, and then you could say, well, this one's on, a board member, a retired board member, and I think they're a good candidate. And this one, well, no, this guy will never put a wetland on his property. Having those things in your back pocket, I think would be very valuable. And I know there's been some work being done here in the state, and continues to be work on how to utilize this. And we'll touch on more on this thought process a little bit more as we go. So one of the things, the various, the national trainings, I still think there's some things to think about related to them. So all that previous was off the national. And again, what I included in there, I cherry picked on what I wanted to cover here. So just another question for you. Over the last 240 years, Hoosiers have drained about what % of Indiana's historical wetlands? What % of our historical wetlands have been drained?
All right, Tony, we're getting a lot of responses in the chat, and they are all A. 85%, all A's, 85%. Although we did get one person that wagered higher and went to 86%.
Well, I wouldn't argue with either one. I saw both actually. So 85, 86%. Very good. Maybe I thought it was just they all chose A because it was the first one they saw, but no, that wasn't the case. Yes, that's true. So a very high percent, and we know what we're trying to do, what we can to protect them, trying to get more back in. But at the same time, a very high percentage has exited. So, all right, very good. Thanks. Moving on.
All right, Tony, before you moved on, there was a little bit of discussion in the chat about, I think a lot of people were surprised that cover crops weren't more cost effective on that table or that you had shown. But again, I think you did hit on that topic of the fact that it's just looking at cost per pound of nitrate removed. And so that's only really part of the picture of the benefits that cover crops provide. And again, with it only being calculated as a single year practice, that means that all that benefit has to be realized in that 1 year when doing those calculations. So I don't know if there was any other thoughts that you had about that or wanted to contribute to that or not.
Yeah, I agree. I guess part of the challenge is, for the cover crop, what we say, 20, 30 bucks an acre, 30 bucks an acre to put the cover crops in. So how many pounds of nitrate are they grabbing? And I think that's part of that challenge in there. But the piece that like I was saying, if all we're going to look at is the nitrate, well, yeah, it looks like it's not very beneficial. But let's add nitrate to soil loss. Let's add that to building organic matter. Let's add that to resiliency later in the season. Let's add weed control later in the year. Let's add biological, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait a second. But usually when you start doing that, the researchers get queasy because once you get more than one variable in there, most don't attempt to do that. So, but I say that we should include all those in there.
I agree.
And don't get me wrong, some of those other practices we get other benefits with them as well. So, but those are always tough for us to show.
Yep.
But I'll still favor the cover crop. So.
I agree. And some of the other discussion was talking about how if we actually started to break it down and looking at cover crops more specifically on that cost benefit for nitrogen removed or other benefits, that sometimes we might need to start thinking about this on a per species basis, because some species might be more efficient at scavenging nitrogen than others and those types of things like that. And so I think you hit the nail on the head in the fact that when we think about utilizing cover crops in our systems, it's strategic and complex, and there's a lot of different ways to get answers to that. But what we do know is that we see those benefits happening as those practices are being implemented.
And And I still think another piece of this is, a lot of our research plots where some of this data is pulled from, it's year 1 of the cover crop, year 2 of the cover crop, and year 3 of the cover crop. They can't go past that, and so, but we know there's a big difference working with our farmers from year 1 versus year 5 versus year 10. And then when we stack practices, the differences, usually we don't get just cover crops out there. We get cover crops and something else going on. So, now we get that synergistic, and I think I've got a slide hitting on that here in a little bit. So
Wonderful.
Yep.
Nothing else in the chat, Tony. So just
All right,
wanted
good point.
to keep you up to speed.
Sure. So we talk about that loss of wetlands, and it's tough. Some of our most productive agricultural lands is where the wetlands used to be, and we need to have that drainage there to make that work. And so don't want to discount the drainage aspect of it. We see it, whether it's completely flooded out fields or just uneven fields. We see these across the landscape somewhere in Indiana, every year. And then soil health, impacts all of these as well. And if it's not the drainage aspect, we know that we've got this runoff challenge, this runoff issue. And so this piece down here about agricultural soils do not have a water runoff erosion problem, they have a water infiltration problem. And I think most of us see that across the landscape. I'll hear somebody say, well, those soils have great infiltration rates, just based on the inherent property of the soil itself. And I'm like, well, yeah, maybe it did, but what has happened management-wise to that? How much crusting? How much compaction? How much loss of organic matter or topsoil do we have there? And so, that impacts the water moving across the landscape more than is included in these. And so, it's one of the things that I tried to hit on here. So, think about this this infiltration aspect, and I think I've done this before with this group. And partly, I start pulling a training, a presentation together. It's like, which group did I present this to? And I'm sorry if you've heard this before, but sometimes, well, at least I have to hear things several times before it finally sinks in. So maybe this will be for some of you as well. So back in 2008, pretty major flooding event across south central southern part of the state, and so this is just one back of the envelope calculations. I've had an engineer, private engineer, question me on some of this, and I never did get a chance to really discuss more with him. But this is just some thought processes on here. So what happened in Columbus, Indiana, the Haw Creek watershed, about 36,000 acres, about 88% of that is cropland. 5-inch rainfall. And I said, and this just made it for easy calculations. If 1.25 more inches of the rain, if we were able to store that in the soil, if we'd been able to infiltrate that in the soil, we would have had 1 billion gallons less of water moving off of that through Columbus. Now I realize it didn't all happen at one time. It was a duration rainfall event. But that'd be less, but if we're not able to infiltrate, that's less water stored in the landscape, or it'd be less runoff or in the soil and not in Haw Creek, reducing the flooding. So one of the ways I want to look at that was that 5-inch rainfall going through central Columbus, going through Columbus was about 19.5 feet deep. If we're able to store 1.25 inches more water, it would be 15 feet deep. Now, don't get me wrong, 15 feet is still an issue. It's still going to be a problem for a lot of people, but you start comparing those maps a little bit. Sorry, the one on the left's a little bit fuzzy. But you start seeing that there's, someplace, especially down here in the bottom right, that, aren't flooded. This structure down here in the bottom right is the Columbus Regional Hospital. So this flooding event caused $180 million in damage to critical infrastructure there. So think about if we'd been able to store a little bit more water, could we have prevented? I'm not saying we could have completely kept it, but just think about that, especially as we have more extreme weather events and whatever. So we see these things happen, and it's one of those things. It's if water moves out into a floodplain and we flood a crop field or whatever. I mean, I don't want to say so what, or a golf course or whatever. Yeah, we've lost some stuff there, but it's not the same as if we've had $180 million damages to a hospital. That meant that hospital is probably out of service for a while. I think I read where they had to move in a mobile hospital there for a while for the region. So pretty powerful, I think. So just another thing to keep in mind as we talk about the impacts of soil health and infiltration. Are we sure the rain infiltrates the soil where it lands and it does not run off to a lower spot in the field? We want to do what we can with that. As you think about that, we want to impact. Think about the impact of crusting and compaction on water movement. Those soils seal over, or we have compaction that does not allow water to move through. Again, doing everything we can to reduce or mitigate those. Talk about that a lot with soil health, and then thinking about those other practices that they listed for drainage, water management, for drainage. The 590 practices and the 4 R's to avoid nitrogen and phosphorus. Are we putting on a lower rate? Are we changing the timings? Are you doing soil testing and all those good things? And this is someone's seen this slide from Eileen Kladivko from down at CPAC. The study done down there, the synergistic benefits of nutrient management, no-till, crop rotation, and cover crops. As part of that system, and the annual nitrate concentration dropped from 30 to under 10. So in those cases, we would guess that it's probably pretty efficient as far as return on investment there. But we also know we got a lot of other intricate values out of those implementation of those practices. And another piece I didn't think was covered in there, but trying to think about the tile risers that we have out in the landscape. What do we do different with those? Those being a direct conduit of surface water. I realize we have to have them in some cases, but how do we? If we're doing other good things with soil health, we get less runoff the landscape. We get more infiltration on those other spots. Tile risers aren't as important, but maybe we're going to replace those with a blind inlet of some sort, French drain type thing. And we've had a few or more of those go in the Northeast, but I think there's more potential for those to be utilized. All right, Stephanie, any questions here?
No, just some, I think maybe some comments about Adam's car getting flooded out. I have to admit, I don't think I know that story, so I'm gonna.
I think I've heard that before. Yeah.
I'm gonna plead ignorance here.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
And then, just some comments on, as you were doing those calculations, that was just looking at Columbus, but then all of the downstream impact that happened, beyond that, and fertilizer that was applied on these landscapes, and all of that getting, washed into the river. And then the last thing that I put in there was, I was searching while you were talking about 1 billion gallons, and I couldn't find anything about what 1 billion gallons of water looked like, but I did find a link, and I put it in the chat about what does 2 billion gallons of water look like. And that comes from watersmart.com, just talking about, how much water we're talking about here that we could have stored in the soil. Something like 40 million bathtubs of water. I mean, that's more baths than, than I'm going to take in my lifetime. But, so there's some good comments.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too. So, it doesn't mean that, so some of that water would have infiltrated and come out in a tile. Don't get me wrong. It's not that Now, and just because we have tile there doesn't mean that it's going to intercept all water. You know, some water is going to bypass that tile and go to groundwater recharge. But either way, it's going to slow the amount of water that gets there. And, you know, it might be that we would have had that 15 foot of water going through town for a longer period than the 19 foot that, you know, that went through. And there's challenges with that as well. Don't get me wrong. But anyway, just again, that back of napkin calculation. So, and as an agronomist, I can do that with engineering stuff. So.
And then the last question that we had here was, you know, talking about, you know, the farmer's role in trying to increase infiltration into the soil, but how do we account for and factor into these things, the loss of our soil when they get put under concrete, when we have urban sprawl, you know, those types of things, and those are calculations that all of a sudden leave the agricultural realm and go into a different agency or group of people to look at when it's, you know, when it's concrete, and then we have stormwater and different things like that. But I know that some of the statistics are from American Farmland Trust is that 1 million acres of cropland are lost every year to urban sprawl and development. And those are usually right around our larger cities that we are losing those productive acres. And so right now it's not slowing down. And I think what Val brought up will continue to be a big issue.
Yep. You know, I hate to say it, but you know, here in the U.S., we almost suffer from too much space. If you've had the opportunity to travel to another country, especially over in Europe, you know, their grocery stores are on the second and third floor of buildings. You know, I mean, they build up more, where instead we just build these single-story box stores. You know, and at what point are we going to say, no, we can't do that anymore? Or, you know, there's enough parking at all these places for every man, woman, and child in a city. You know, it's like, are they ever all full? No, they're rarely ever all full.
Maybe at Christmas, right? I mean,
yeah,
the mall
right,
parking lot can get
Black
packed at
Friday,
Christmas
and
time.
you know, right, there's a few times they are. So, anyways, all right, we digress a lot. So, let's take about a 5-minute break. Let's be back at 10:30, and we'll start up again. Thanks.
All right, Tony, I don't have a nice timer for you,
I
but I'll
don't-
just keep track of
I don't
time,
either.
okay?
Yeah, we just know it's right at 10:30, so it's pretty nice. So, okay. All right, so it's 10:30. Let's get started again. Stephanie, do you have a couple of poll questions we can throw in there?
Certainly. Sorry, Tony, I just stepped back.
That's right. That's right. Nope, we just started.
Okay, good. I'll just kind of launch the first one, kind of to get everyone an idea of how see how things are going for them outside of work and their holiday shopping. How is your holiday shopping going? So again, hopefully this should pop up on your screen. If not, on the top right-hand side, you should see a rectangular box with an F on it for forms. And if you click on that, you should see polls. And for those of you on an iPhone, it should be either in the chat or if there's a forms tab, you should be able to click on that and see the launched poll. All right, Tony, I don't know if you're seeing the responses as they're coming through or not.
Yeah, I did pull it up. Hopefully I don't delete my presentation, but yeah, so far.
I can still see it in the background, so we're doing good here. So we're getting quite a few responses, about 71. So it looks like about 50% of our crew here today has a good start, but they have more to go. And to be honest, that's where I fell as well. I think I have a good start, but I'm certainly not finished.
Well, in typical dad mode, I clicked the not even started. So, all right, let's.
All right, we'll be done with that one.
Okay.
Here we go. We'll launch another one, kind of just to get you guys in the Christmas spirit, holiday spirit. What type of Christmas tree do you put up in your home?
This could be home, apartment, whatever.
Yeah, wherever your residence is. How does that sound?
Yeah.
Hey. So it looks like the front and center winner on this is that we all are pretty okay with faking it. We all got about 60% of us have fake trees. So someone did give the response that fake is real to me. Thank you, Tom.
All you gotta do is just go pull it out of the box and you're ready to go. So there is something to be said for that.
I figured I can use it over and over and over again. So I do like that.
All right.
One more, you think, Tony? Or
sure, yeah, let's do one more. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna launch. This is okay. I promise this will be the last holiday themed poll. So this is what is your favorite holiday bowl? A salad bowl, a fruit bowl, a punch bowl? Definitely spiked. A Rose Bowl or a KFC bowl? And those of you who don't know what a KFC bowl is, it makes me very sad. Layers of my favorite. Well, if you remember that commercial from like 2010 or something like that, God knows when it came out. Maybe they still have KFC bowls. I don't know.
I noticed this one. Those that drink hit the punch bowl quickly. That was leading above and beyond at the beginning, but now they're starting to even out here a little bit. So
there we go. Shall I close that one out?
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and close it out. We'll go ahead and get started on the other. All right. Well, got to add attempts at a little bit of comedic relief in here, so that's about all you get. So anyways, all right, so let's get started again. Thanks a bunch, Stephanie. We'll jump into irrigation. And so when we start thinking about irrigation, water management, again, there's the need for, the potential for the availability for the soil, the nutrients that are there, the detachment, and there also has to be a transport mechanism for them to move offsite. So a quick question here. How many cropland acres are irrigated in Indiana according to the 2017 Ag Census? How many cropland acres are irrigated in Indiana? 275,000, 1.125 million, 1.422 million, or 555,000 acres?
All right, Tony, we're getting quite a few responses, and it's actually an honest mishmash of A's, D's, and C's. I see a few B's. It's
Yeah.
honestly a melting pot of responses here.
Yeah, yeah. It is. This is a little more difficult, a little more challenging one. You know, something that we don't think about a lot. You know, if you're in a county that has a lot of it, it seems like you've got a lot of acres. At the same time, you know, how many acres are in your county? And it's about 555,000 acres, according to the 2017 Ag Census. I think we saw a pretty good increase right around or after the drought of 2012. I think we saw irrigation going in on fields that, you know, we've never seen irrigation before. You know, and so, you know, just a lot more. And then also breaking it down by county and what percent that is of the state total. So, you know, always, to me, always interesting. And impacts all of us differently. So let's think about irrigation a little bit. You know, the rainfall and irrigation water are deposited into the bank, into the soil. The plant water use is a removal from the bank. Still thinking about it as a soil, that water holding capacity, you know, how much it can be held, how much of it is there within the roots, how much of it percolates down deeper. Type of soil makes a big difference. You know, the heavier soils, the clays versus the sands, obviously. Intake rates, both of those. How much water is actually infiltrated and how much is lost as runoff. Touch on that a little bit more. What is the rooting depth of the plants? You know, the further they're able to explore that soil profile, get more water, obviously a better thing. And then deletion, you know, how much can the plants actually pull out of there? And then what does move down through the soil profile potentially has other nutrients, pesticides, you know, anything soluble attached to those. So we think about this, you know, what percent of the soil is saturated, you know, we've got about 50% is solids. We want to have some air in there, but when we're, you know, when there are no voids left, the air voids left, the soil is saturated. When water is no longer drained by gravity, the soil is at field capacity. When the plants have pulled as much water as they can, the soil is at a wilting point, or in some cases the plants are about to wilt. And then the difference between the field capacity and the permanent wilting point is the available water capacity. So that's the part that we're usually, you know, wanting to be in that range there more. What's the available water capacity? But would still say, and this piece I don't think was touched on much, was in the national training, that impact of infiltration. You know, what does crusting, compaction, soil organic matter have on that water holding capacity, on that water capacity? So we know very important. So when we have we apply irrigation to soil, a certain amount of it, you know, infiltrates. We get that refill. In this case, we're up to, you know, that ½ inch there. Evapotranspiration takes place. They say there's a little bit of rain there. That balance decreases, and as we reduce that balance after day 3, day 4, the evapotranspiration continues to take place. We continue to see that depletion. We're not getting enough water there, so now there's fewer roots that come in contact with that water, and we're seeing less water in the soil profile. You know, makes sense, but and then there's also the piece about you know, how much residue do we have on the surface to you know, slow that evapotranspiration as well.
Hey, Tony, as you're switching slides, we had a question in here from Andrew about if you know what percentage of used irrigation water gets back into the aquifer to be used again. And Mike Hughes had a statement of 0.2%, but I honestly I don't know the answer to that one, and
I don't. I think we'll touch on some things here that the answer is going to be it depends. So there you go, Andrew. So I think this kind of fits in, you know, as far as evapotranspiration and soil health. You know, again, within this training, that impact was really not mentioned. And so continuing on, and I think we'll get into some of this a little bit about how much of that potentially makes it in. So we start thinking about normal rainfall year, 35-ish inches. The crop needs about 16 inches for the total crop year. This middle section here is about 6 inches of irrigation needed in July and August. Again, it's average rainfall through the year, but the crop has its greatest needs at that middle part of the season, and there's not enough water there, and so sometimes we just have crops that just kind of struggle to make it through. Hopefully we've got good soil organic matter. We've had some good water rains, water holding capacity. That's that part about trying to hold on as much of that water, that natural water that happens, as possible, and then also the residue to have a reduced evapotranspiration. Hopefully,
hey Tony, we have a question about TSPs on TechReg. If we have any TSPs that write irrigation water management plans, and I just wanted to let you know that I did check the new TSP website and I searched by the 118 irrigation water management plan, and I still think that is the correct code, whether it's a CAP or a CPA or a whatever ABC it is. And it doesn't look like we have any TSPs, but maybe you would know.
Yeah, over the years, we've had 1, 2, or 3, and somebody in northern Indiana, and they've been there occasionally. They've done some stuff, and so as you try and do with all TSPs, we try and those that are in there, we try and get them to renew, and it's possible they haven't renewed. The other thing is we've gone from a new from TechReg to National Registry, and so it should be that people that were certified for CAPs should have been transferred over to the various CPAs and DIAs. And so, but one thing we're not 100% sure of is that every single one of them were legacied over from the previous version to that. So were they did they choose not to renew, were they lost in the renewal process, forgot to do it, or were they lost in the transition of the process? But either way, there hasn't been very many.
Thank you.
So think about the different soils. Different soils have different water holding capacities. We can go through a series of intricate calculations to figure that out, what the water holding capacities are, and we know that the soils, depending on sands and salts and clays and how much they hold and the depths of all those, we can go through and calculate that out, or sometimes we can the values will be there right there for us, web soil survey. There's also other ways of attempting to do this through squeezing the soil together. What's the feel or appearance? How is that? There's also gravimetric sampling and electrode blocks of the soil, gypsum and tensiometers and other things like that that can be utilized to figure that out. The other thing that we try and think about a little bit is the uniformity of the irrigation that is actually going to happen. So once we've decided that we do need to irrigate, we want to make sure that we're going to put on 1 inch, that we're getting 1 inch across the whole field. And that piece about 10% deviation from the average, that's ideal. But if we have an over or under, that's going to be for each application. And we've ever heard of stories where the irrigation system is installed, but they put the wrong sprinklers. They started at the wrong end, which kind of seems hard to believe, but they've ever found that where they put the wrong sprinkler heads on. But then that other piece in here about a 30% deviation on a field in an 8-inch irrigation system is, either 6 inches or 10 inches. And, so, we already have crop circles out there, but we're going to have a different emphasis on the type of crop circles that we're going to see out there. And so when you get these infrared imagery, and I probably have some, I haven't seen it, but from the drones and whatever, that would be really valuable in season. We might be able to tell some of those. It's like, hey, we've got a nozzle head that's plugged or whatever that's not working, and it needs to get fixed. So making sure that we're taking care of those. And then does that uniformity also equal infiltration across the whole field? Just because we've got it being applied evenly doesn't mean it's infiltrating the same across the field. I'm not sure that's always the case. And so again, just this showing this picture here as far as the crop circles and that real nice infrared of that, and hopefully producers are able to utilize that. The way we sorry about that. The way we do that is this uniformity test with the catch cans. I know we did some training with that. We're overdue to do that again, where we put these catch cans under the irrigation system. We run the irrigation system across them. Then we are able to calculate for every one of those, how much water is in them, and to see what the difference is. And so then when you do that, you collect all those different points, and that's what these dots are across here, the catch can volumes, and you plot them across here, and you can find out that, well, something here at about 250 feet from the pivot, there's something that was going on with that head. And then we also hear about this a lot at the end of the irrigation system. There's other things that go on as far as inconsistencies of the amount of water that's put on. So, but you can see that across here. Most part, things are pretty tight, which is what we want. That volume, they're shooting for 100, and that's mostly where we're at. But there are differences there. So. Also do things with irrigation scheduling, trying to figure out when and how much to put on, trying to figure out how much has been lost through evapotranspiration, what's the water holding capacity of the soil, and so various ways of doing that. A lot of time has been spent developing computer programs for that, and yet very few people use them. There's also hard copies you can use. Some people, it's always interesting. You'll see some, it's just like, well, once I turn them on, they're just on all the time. They're moving them across the fields. The work that was done a few years ago that the irrigation scheduling really saves at 3 times of the year, mostly early in the season. You think about it, that plant is smaller, it doesn't need as much. After a rain, we either over and underestimate, and so having good having rain gauges out there from one end of the field to the other. We know sometimes the rainfall amounts can vary that much from one end to the other. And then also at the end of the season, when that plant is senescing, dying, doesn't need as much water, obviously. So and also obviously too much impacts transport. So I still ask the question about water irrigation. Are we actually getting infiltration? And so many of our crop fields that are irrigated are under specialty crops or with specialty crops, whether it's seed corn. I see a lot of seed corn in northern part of the state, but other parts as well. And then also throw in tomatoes, potatoes, melons, and whatever else. But are we sure that 1 inch of irrigated water infiltrates the soil where it lands when applied? And so we want to make sure we get that infiltration. And if we're not, we're potentially seeing a runoff off of those sites. But those fields usually are beat up. Those fields have little to no residue, a lot of them anyways. I do remember a case scenario, I wish I'd thrown the slide in there, but back at the drought of 2012, farm west of Indianapolis, where they were applying irrigation, and they realized they didn't have to put on as much irrigation water because they were getting more of it to infiltrate. So they were actually able to put on a little bit less water. So that was an interesting water savings thing there. So then the things we're thinking about related to irrigation induced erosion, and so you can see this, if you're out in one of these fields, on the slope there, you're going to get some gullies there, irrigation induced erosion. It sounds weird, but once you've been out in the field, you're like, oh my God, sometimes it's pretty dramatic. And again, these fields are beat up. There's not much residue in them. There's little to no till cover crop. It's fascinating to me that for some reason how we can't get cover crops established on some of these irrigated acres, because sometimes it's a specialty crop and that specialty crop comes off earlier than our normal crops. So our potential of getting a cover crop out there seems to be higher. I've also ever heard of people utilizing the irrigation to get their cover crop up and started, up and growing. Think about that. Turn on your irrigation system once, give it a timely 1-inch rain, and voila, we're not waiting on Mother Nature. So there is some interesting potential there related to that I think we're missing at times. All right, any other questions come in related to this?
So Tony, there was a good side conversation about TSPs and how do we continue to do to utilize some of these CPAs and other things that we have in our repertoire of practices when we don't have the TSPs to do them. So I think a lot of that discussion was hitting on the chicken or the egg issue with irrigation and grazing and some of these other activities that we do that are now starting to have conservation I almost said activity plans, but it's the conservation, it's the CPA, formerly known as conservation activity plans.
Yeah.
Is what I meant to say.
Age-old challenge, chicken and egg with the do we get the practices and then programmatically we say, well, we can't we can't contract any of these until we have TSP. Well, it's like we're not going to have any TSPs until we get any of these. So yeah, I know it's this real circuitous route there. So to me, it's one of those things of trying to get something promoted a little bit and trying to get somebody who maybe is already in there or somebody else who could add to that piece. There's a lot of agronomists that don't even think to do the irrigation one. Well, there's a few that would they provide assistance with irrigation.
And if we think about our farmers in this situation, our scenario as the consumers, and if they want those practices, then the person providing that service, which would be the TSPs in this case, should probably get on board to provide that. But again, it doesn't always happen overnight.
Yeah.
And Ruth did make a comment to that in some of the counties down in the southeast that they are using irrigation to get cover crops going in some cases. And so I think it's an interesting thought and an interesting perspective that, like you said, is maybe not considered as much as maybe it should be. Here in Indiana, where we do have, whether it's 38 or 42 inches of rainfall a year, right, to use some irrigation water to get cover crops growing should be a consideration if you have access to it. As you head further west, where you're looking at 9 to 10 inches of water a year, utilizing irrigation water for practices like cover crops or other types of establishment is much more of a concern, and a lot of people are really thinking about how to do that. But yeah, I think it might be something here.
Yeah, and I think it's probably National No-Till Conference, hearing one of those producers from out west that talked about that. I'm like, well, why can't we do that here? So that's good to hear that we do have some of that going on. So thanks for sharing that, Ruth. Good point. All right. Much else?
No, not too much. I did have someone wondering about that question about urban sprawl, if we could talk about that, but I think that we actually addressed that pretty good before the break, so it might have just been missed. And then looking at something about other conservation practices that we don't see very much, maybe in more urban settings, green roofs, pervious concrete, those types of things for water management outside of ag areas. When you were going through some of those webinars, was there any comments about any of those things?
No, there wasn't.
Okay.
It was all very ag-centric, and it's a really good point. How do we get these things included as infrastructure, for new infrastructure, replacement of infrastructure in cities? And I know that, so it's one of those things to kind of watch every now and then. It's the Indiana Water Resources Association, IWRA, and then also Indiana Water Monitoring Council have conferences around the state every year. Well, we used to when we had conferences, and so we would go see some of those things. So sometimes we might have an ag component. We go out and look at things, or we would have where we're going and looking at infrastructure there in Bloomington, or I've seen some here around Purdue. I know other cities have done it as well. And I know we've talked about some of that. We've had other discussions with that, really trying to look and see what was going on, like out east in the Delmarva, and see what other practices, and as much as we can promote those practices, you know, especially the Soil and Water Conservation District probably does it, but then how does it fit, or does it fit within our field office tech guide, and which practices? So that's one of those things of, if we see some of those, you know, a handbook from another state, or tech guide practices from another state that, you know, we think we need to steal, maybe we need to revisit that or rethink about that. And especially as we continue to think about urban, as we include urban farming and small farms in that. So yeah.
especially since it's been identified as a priority
Yeah.
to the chief. So
Yeah.
one other thing, Tony, Al has his hand raised, and I see that his mic is unmuted.
Woohoo! Yeah, I just wanted to say with the urban question, I know there is research being done, because I've read papers arguing that it's actually the urban hardening that creates more problems with our river water quality than ag land. So I don't know if that's information we could find and get out, because if you're going to be talking particularly to the public about agriculture problems, it's always good to put that in context with the other sources. And then the second thing, because I can't help but bring compliance into this, is that there's actually I'll just call it an exemption if you have a wetland that is growing in size because the tile's being overloaded, or the drainage system isn't working as well because tile has been added to a system, or it's becoming more urban upstream, that you are allowed to install new additional tile to handle that additional sources. I know we did that on 114 just west of Rensselaer, Indiana. There was strip development along the highway leading out of town, and there was agricultural ground just south of there, and we could show that it was getting wetter and wetter as the highway became more and more developed with development. So we reconfigured their tile and allowed them to put in a larger size. So just something to remember.
Okay.
I'm done.
All right.
Very good.
Sounds good. Thanks, Al.
Any polls, Tony, you want me to launch or anything like that?
No, I think we got just a short section here, and then I think we're going to have another break here shortly. So
Got it.
all right. So yeah, like we know, all these things, many of these things, intricately involved, you know, connected, interconnected, and always a little bit challenging. You know, working with farm public. You know, and I have had that experience, you know, being at a field day and having farmers ask me questions in front of a group about, you know, here you are talking about all the things that we're doing, and, you know, what are they doing in the city? You know, what are they doing about? And I'm like, well, you know, I don't know what they're doing in every city, but, you know, I live in West Lafayette, and I know that they're trying to disconnect our stormwater, you know, from our from septic, and you know, I'm having to pay, you know, 10 or 15 bucks more a month because of all those changes they're making. So, hey, you know, we've been working on it for 20 years, you know, so I'm like, I don't know how it's going, but I know they're attempting to do better. So, yep, all very connected. And we don't always know all the other pieces that are going on too. It's always kind of tough to know that. So, back to water management, salts. Little section on this. I'm only going to hit the basics on this because this is not something we deal with a lot in Indiana, not a big issue in Indiana. Although the overall question I have, if the fries already are salted, why do you add salt before you ever even tasted the fries? Just a rhetorical question. I'm sorry when I think about salt. So anyways, think about the basics. Too much salt can impact permeability, infiltration rate. All waters contain salts. Not really an issue here in Indiana. We have enough precipitation, not too much. Although we do see it more out west where there's evapotranspiration exceeds precipitation, cropland or rangeland, and we do see it some here in Indiana in greenhouses and high tunnels. And so there was this piece I pulled out of salt accumulation for vegetable production in high tunnels. There's actually a little thing in here from the Purdue Vegetable Crop Hotline that this is an issue, can be a factor. And you think about it, we just have to use the water over and over again from irrigation and keep the same soils, and we're not flushing bringing other water and rainwater in. So we can have some issues there, especially for vegetable crops. It is something to potentially be concerned with. Very little on starter fertilizers related to corn in the corn and soybean field guide. Talks about placement, and it is riskier if we get ammonium nitrate salts, can inhibit or damage seedlings, and more of a problem if we have sandy soils or dry conditions. And then where we do have a problem, the salinity and sodic soil management, the conservation practice system 610. And again, not much of that in Indiana, but there is potential for that. If you came from out west or you're going to be working out west, there is much more of a challenge out there. All right, so let's take another 5-minute break. So we'll start back up at 11:07. So go stretch, whatever else you need to do, and we'll probably have a couple polls or questions for you then too. So see you back at 11:07.
Man, Tony, you should have timed it to be 11:11. That's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
11:11. I don't know why, but no.
I don't know.
That's okay.
Yeah, maybe next time. All right, Steph. Now I got 11:07. So
I do too.
I think we had a couple of other polls or questions we're going to try and include here.
All right. Well, I'm going to launch one having to do with household water usage. We just spent a little bit of time kind of talking about irrigation as an agricultural water use. So I'm gonna, ask you guys a question about what is Indiana's largest household water usage? Is that in flushing toilets and faucet use, in showering, washing clothes, or plumbing leaks? I wondered where bathing fits in here, but I don't know. So we'll just answer the question.
Probably showering, right?
I would guess so. They should have said showering and bathing, but All right, we're getting some responses. People are coming back in. As you submit it, then you'll see the percentages change. We're getting about 40% of people responding that it's showering. I'll let this go for just a minute, and then I'll put some information. All right, Tony, it looks like we have a decent amount of responses here. And in the chat box, I'm just going to put the response below for you, and you can click on that box. But flushing toilet consumes the most water in the average household. About 24% of our water usage goes to flushing toilets. And so you as conservationists will think this is as ironic as I do, because we spend a lot of time working with farmers to keep dirty water out of clean water. But here we are making the water dirty, and that is the biggest usage of our water. So I think that's interesting. Thanks, Tom. He only flushes when it's brown. I have a little saying that my aunt had given me, something like, if it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down. So just remember that. And when I was talking with Tony about this earlier, I think I had used maybe more, what's the word, prolific or profuse language on pooping in clean water. So that's an interesting thing that we do.
Yeah, I thought you had potty mouth when you were talking.
I know. I'm so potty mouth. Haha. All right, I'm gonna close out that poll, and then we will launch one more. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right, let's see here. I'll save the sediment questions. Okay, we'll launch. What type of water do you drink? When we think about water quality and water usage and things like that, so what kind of water do you drink? Is it straight from the tap? Is it cooled through the fridge? Is it, or in a container in the fridge? Is it a purchased bottled kind or carbonated beverages? Or if there's not alcohol in my liquid, why bother, huh? Oh, and then we got some complications because people pointed out well water, but it does come from the tap. But I do appreciate the fact that you're making that clarification, because there's that assumption that tap water is just city water. So next time, Tony, take note. We need to make sure that we identify also well water.
Yeah,
Plus, I'm
right.
getting snarky comments about who adds water to alcohol. So I'm really sorry about that. I just typed what I was told.
I would agree about the straight from the tap. Yeah, that the well water could be included in that.
All right, Tony, I think that so when you're done with your poll, you can click the done button on the bottom right-hand side, and then it leaves your screen. We have some more polls, but we can kind of close out with those towards the end of the training. I think the floor is yours again.
All right, very good, very good. All right, so we're in the homeward stretch. Although I think I've got you till noon. At least that's when we're gonna finish. So we will be done by then, one way or another. So. All right, so one of the things we want to do is hit this section on sediment management, and again, we have to have availability of the sediment. We've got to have detachment and transport mechanisms for it to move off the site and become an issue. So pretty rudimentary, but you know, what is sediment? Hopefully we all know this. Fragmented material that originates from weathering of rocks, transported by air, water, ice. Variety of different sizes. More familiar to us here in Indiana is the clay, silt, and sand. As we get further out west, you know, we're more likely to pick up the boulder, size. Of course, we do get some of the gravels here in Indiana as well. Sedimentation processes also hopefully pretty familiar to us. You know, whether it's how that erosion happens, where it's transported from, and where it's deposited, how it's deposited. And then with those sediment sources, the hill slope, and you know, so there's a lot of times where erosion within a field stays within a field. It's just redistributed from one part of the field to another part of the field. But then we also have sediment that's delivered off-site, and then we also know that we have stream or channel bank erosion, sometimes pretty devastating. All those actually look pretty devastating. Various adverse effects from this, you know, the water quality issues. We're going to treat that water so we're able to drink it coming out of our tap. You know, all the biological impacts to the fishing, to the macroinvertebrates, everything that's there, clogging up our reservoirs, causing navigational issues in our waterways, and then also the potential for downstream flooding. So all those, we know sediment is very detrimental in all those pieces. And something that we see a fair amount, you know, this stream here, it's pretty shallow, and then we get some fine sediment in over it, and it looks pretty milky, pretty chocolatey, pretty quick. And you know, we see this a lot. Think about this here in the spring, after any rainfall. How many of our streams look like this in Indiana? And a lot of times I would say these are those silts and clays, those fine silts and clays that are remaining in suspension that have moved off site. The sands have already separated out, and those pieces are still staying in suspension. And of course, unfortunately, they have various nutrients and pesticides and whatever else attached to them. So, and every now and then we get these cases of extreme sedimentation. This picture out of Nebraska, where they're standing on this bridge and they're looking, you know, one downstream of the bridge, and they've got, you know, actual see water moving there, and then upstream of the bridge, and you've got this large sedimentation issue there. So it's doing a great job, actually, as a washout of sorts. Probably wasn't what it was designed for, but that's what's happened there. Variety of different resources to us. You know, go through, look at these sometime. You know, there's almost always some little thing in there. It's like, oh yeah, I knew that, but there's just a little reminder on there, or that's why we phrase it that way, or that's why we talk about it that way. And there's you know, sediment, shoreline bank, and channel erosion, and these are out there, as well as a chapter of the National Engineering Handbook. You know, it's engineering handbook, so I've never cracked open that chapter before, but there's a whole section on that, and so part of this, rest of this kind of goes into bits and pieces of that. So in those a fluvial water movement process and sedimentation, how that all works, we think about the floodplain and how it interacts, and depending on the water level and how it moves across that, as to you know, how it's all working together. But here's a nice cross section. I think we're pretty familiar with that. The challenges when we go through and straighten some of these places, we just move the water faster to another location sometimes. But when we have these, we can have the water move back and forth across the landscape. You know, we have more floodplains in there and whatever. You know, we allow for more of that energy to be taken out, and water to spread across that whole area usually helps us out. If we just put up a wall or something on one side, we're just going to push the issue to someone else, or downstream onto someone else. This part of presentation, National had lots of formulas and charts and that. This is the only one I'm going to show you, just to tell you that there are a lot of those. If you're really interested in this, please go open up this one, go take that egg learn or something else. We don't usually get into this lots. It's good to know that there's basics on that. There's others that can help us with it. You know that stream bank erosion is more of a problem today than it was previous, as we have, I think you kind of think about it a little bit, as we've had a degradation of soils, soil erosion, loss of soil organic matter. We have more, higher percent that runs off. We've also had sediment that's filled in these streams and ditches, so the carrying capacity is less, and so they just want to spread out and cause some other issues. So, we see that across the landscape as well. And then just a few summary thoughts. The portion of sediment contributes, today's portion of sediment contributions coming from stream banks considerably higher than what they used to be in the uplands when they were subject to older practices. Accelerated stream bank erosion and a shift to an unstable channel evolution stage can easily create accelerated erosion 1 or 2 orders of magnitude greater than the natural channel erosion. The loss of floodplains due to decision of channelization will have a longer term negative impacts on not only water quality, but aquatic life and stream stability. The closer we plan to natural channel stability, the more long-term positive impacts we'll have on water quality and lower O&M. Then we have other tools that can help us with some of this. We think about all these challenges related to controlling sediment. It's always kind of interesting to think about where this sediment is coming from. If we can think about that, if we can do that, it helps us identify what we need to address in the landscape. And a lot of times it's pretty evident, we can see that, but we also have some tools that are available to us. Hopefully these are all familiar to us. The off-site delivery, I think that's not quite the right name, within Russell. What percent of the erosion actually leaves the field, and what percent it actually stays on the field. But then we also have it for the other land uses as well, that we can source some of this sediment out. And then also related to the riparian areas and in-stream as well. Variety of conservation practices. We talk about that, avoiding, controlling, trapping practices, and how all those practices can impact each of those. And so, different ones do a better job at avoiding, and some do a better job at trapping. Unfortunately, the pond is only going to accumulate the sediment, but other practices will have a much better impact of keeping that residue, that soil and sedimentation from even getting to that site. Then there's also the CPPEs, the conservation practice physical effects, and all of the practices are rated based on the different resource concerns. And so, residue management does a much better job of shoot and rill, but doesn't do much for classic gully. And just like stream bank shoreline protection, obviously it does nothing for shoot and rill, but it does do a pretty good job for stream bank and shoreline. And then there are other practices that do little bits for some things and not any for others as well. So all of those have been included in there. So still a few other items I think we ought to think about. This wasn't talked about in there much, but erosion, how much is tolerable? Many of the soils in Indiana, are about 4 tons per acre per year for tolerable soil loss. So after 1 year, it's that 0.025 inch of soil loss, and after 40 years, it's an inch of soil loss. And if we think about that 4 tons per year, it doesn't seem like much, but after 40 years, 160 tons, that's a little more daunting. And that's an inch of topsoil loss, of our most productive soil organic matter, nutrients, everything that's lost from that site. And so This example was used for some stuff that we've done on the Western Lake Erie Basin. You know, we're doing a pretty good job of controlling erosion there, but at the same time, any little bits we get there, especially related to, you know, Lake Erie, we think about some other reservoirs. You know, you know, it's not tolerable for those end users. It might be tolerable as we defined it, as we used to define it, which I always cringe whenever I hear the tolerable soil loss level now. But anyways. I talked about this before. What are our largest wasp cobs in Indiana? Unfortunately, it is our main lakes and reservoirs. Just our sediment accumulators. So whether it's Lake Schaefer, Freeman, Monroe, Patoka, as well as other reservoirs like Mississinawa, Morse, Geist, Eagle Creek, but even Lake Erie. So as we collect that sediment, it reduces water capacity and depth. But as we do that, shallower water warms up faster. And warmer water impacts algal growth, and that maybe leads to harmful algal blooms. So, you know, again, all these things are intertwined, not in a good way, but so it just makes things more challenging for us. Variety of practices that we can implement across the landscape to try and slow, control that erosion. Do a great job with these, trying to fit those in and where they're needed. And I still say that, you know, how do we make the part of the system, no-till cover crops, you know, fit into this? Still just hugely important related to that. All right, any questions or comments on that section?
Tony, there was just a lot of people out there that were kind of agreeing with you when talking about you know, erosion not being tolerable and looking at trying to use more no-till to reduce erosion and sedimentation. Jennifer did want to add that when you were talking about the CPPEs and the practice benefit points, you know, a lot of those things we aren't as familiar with the CPPEs anymore, but all of those things are built into CART. So as planners are using CART, that process of selecting the resource concerns and putting that, basically gauging it and marking where it is being cross-referenced with the CPPEs for those practices when you start to look at practices providing points in CART. So although you may not be familiar with it or you haven't looked at it in a long time, you access CPPEs on a daily basis. So thanks for that reminder, Jennifer.
Yep, thanks. Yep, in the background there. Yep, good points.
And it is available on SharePoint as well, those practice benefit points and other things like that. So
yeah.
Other than that, nope, no, not a lot of other comments.
Okay. Well, all right. So kind of the last section I want to talk a little bit about is the water bodies and where all of these troublesome, you know, sediments and water quality and everything end up at impairments. And so just need to talk about these a little bit. So I start thinking about all the different water bodies. You know, that's where we see them at, show up on the farm, the field, the pasture. Obviously, as water flows downhill, all of them accumulate wherever they're ending up at, and so it creates all those different challenges. And at the same time, you know, we look at our farms and whether they're fortunate enough to have a pond or a lake there or a wetland. You know, those are some of the most beautiful pictures, you know, associated with a farmstead or farmland. And you know, they're highly valued. They're thought of very highly, but they're those accumulators of everything else that's going on. And how do we help those farmers, those landowners, preserve and protect those? And some are very cognizant of that and doing what they can, and others are still attempting to figure it out. But just trying to think about all that. So when we think about these, all these various water bodies, the ditches, creeks, streams, and rivers, just so intertwined. Throw in, I would include open ditches there from some of our flatter areas. Always changing, the challenges there. They're resilient. They're always trying to bounce back. But they do have their challenges, especially like, unfortunately, some of those open ditches, having to be dipped out from sediment and whatever else. Then those ponds, lake reservoirs, whether they're natural or made, across our landscape, and then the aquifer, something that we barely acknowledge, but yet are there, very important sources water for our wells, for drinking and irrigation and other water uses. So think about those lakes and ponds a little bit, those different trophic types. What's the age of that, especially of that lake. Unfortunately, like Lake Erie, we're seeing more of the eutrophic issues there. But all of those trophic states have very specific numbers related to them, components related to them as to what trophic state they fit into. And so we're trying to keep these as pristine as we can, at the same time, with issues on there, human activities on them. Many of these are degraded, and how do we slow that degradation? How do we help improve those and protect them? So that's the part where this artificial piece comes in, from all the human activities, whether it's nutrients or suspended solids. All those create challenges and pressures related to all of those, especially the uses that we want them for. Groundwater, kind of forgotten a little bit. We're very fortunate here in the Midwest, here in Indiana. I'll show that here again a little bit. How much we rely on this for so many different things, for drinking, for irrigation, and for all those other uses. Groundwater withdrawals, a little age, sorry, 2010. In Indiana, we think we withdraw a lot of water, but it's just a drop in the bucket compared to some other states. Especially you get out west, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, a lot for irrigation. And then here, just talking about how much of it is for agriculture and irrigation. I can imagine that's probably partly what California and Texas are as well, for irrigation. Very fortunate with some of the aquifers we have over most of the state. Pretty good groundwater resources. Obviously a little bit better in the northern part of the state. I know down south we have a tough time getting groundwater. Creates challenges for watering systems, for livestock, for grazing, whatever else, houses as well. We think about those, how that groundwater moves throughout the soil, the geology, very complex, and I'm not going to get into it very much. Just as far as, is it short amount of time or a long amount of time is it moving, and just the impacts of put a well in there, or what a stream does in those recharge areas. All very interesting, but very complex, and a geologist you should be. And then along with that, those surface water and groundwater interactions, those places where we have, where it appears more of the surface water obviously is, moving down through the profile and adding to the water table, and other places where the water table, the groundwater is moving a little bit more laterally and up to to a stream or a river in that. So a lot of things come into play. Layers in the soil and geology, the water tables, the water use, and all that. So again, geologist, you should be groundwater withdrawal. So we throw a well in there. We've got what might be a normal water flow, water movement. put a well. You heard this talked a lot about in the drought during 2012. Indiana Division of Water works with people on the wells, and where we had big irrigation systems, or in some cases large farms, pulling out a lot of water. We would hear of wells going dry, of houses nearby. So you kind of see that cone down here on the bottom that happens. And so as you turn that well on, as you pump water out, you have less water. So if you had a house just not too far away from that, their well might go dry. So had issues of that in 2012, and more often than not, the farms had to, had to or did assist those homeowners with putting in a new well, and they usually had to dig, put a well in deeper than where they were at. So just challenges of things across the landscape. Think about occurrences of contaminants in groundwater. First we have to have the availability. So it's, we don't use a product, we're not going to have an issue. But in this case, it's atrazine. This is from a few years ago, I think 2006. And so, used across the Corn Belt. So that's why we have some of that. But then it also has to go with the depth percent of shallow wells. So you start thinking about a little bit of work I did in Northwest Indiana. There's more likely we had shallower wells there, more likely, at least with the homeowners in that. Some work done by Indiana Farm Bureau and Soil and Water Conservation Districts back in the early mid 90s, showed that if you had well less than 50 foot, your chances of having contamination was much higher than anything over 75 feet deep. So, it kind of makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. And oftentimes those shallower wells are unfortunately in a sandy soil anyway. So you just had a multiplicative factors there causing problems. And then also related to a risk of nitrogen in groundwater. And again, based a lot on the soils that are there, but also has to, where the nutrients, where the nitrogen is applied. So challenges related to that. One thing I think we forget a little bit about is abandoned wells and how we address those, making sure that, if we're out on landscape, we see those, that we're trying to encourage producers to get those plugged. I think we can still assist with this. I'm not sure. I'm sorry, I should know that. I just remember, long ago, working in a field office, and would have a farmstead that had been taken out for whatever reason, old farmstead, and my first thought was, oh my goodness, I hope they plugged the well out there. And so I used to always include information to them to try and encourage that. So there's some information out there from IDNR Division of Water. And there's also a pretty good publication out of Purdue about how to do that. And some of these things you don't have to. There's not a lot of work involved as far as capping them, but just making sure that it's done. Or a good strong attempt is made. All right. So moving on here, talk a little bit about streams and rivers. And there's a pretty big section on here. And part of it, I'm a little hesitant on this because we don't get involved in this a lot, but it had to do with what the streams and rivers and how they looked and the names for them and the cross sections and all that stuff. Again, we don't get involved in that very much as far as stream order type stuff. It does have an impact as far as how fast the water is moving through, the temperature, the nutrients that are impacting it, especially on those things on water quality. We do utilize the Stream Visual Assessment Protocol, the SVAP. There's been another version that's come out of that. We look at the different elements that are on there and evaluate those. And we're able to look at those as far as an overall assessment and figure out what else is going on in that stream and what might be some of the pressures, the challenges on that. I thought this was interesting. This is I think this is a certified conservation planning course farm out in Nebraska City, I think. I'm not sure, I wasn't out there, but so I think that might be where it's from. But you know, just looking at this from a landscape perspective, and then the you know, the nice drawing here as far as what practices were put in, and hopefully you can kind of see those. But you know, where the filter strips were added, where the grass waterways, the field borders, you know, the riparian areas and all that. You know, where they were expanded, where more was added to try to address the water issues across this farm. And you know, hopefully again they're doing some of those other conservation practices in no-till and that as well. But just a nice picture showing what had happened there. So as we know, you know, all these things are tied together across the agricultural landscape. Knowing about them and how they work a little bit helps us hopefully think about how we include other conservation practices across the landscape, and trying to get the right practices to address the situation, especially for that producer, which most of you are already working on. So in the very, very home stretch here, just a few things related to additional pieces related to this. And I think these are some things to just kind of keep in mind, this watershed assessment and targeting. How do we try and identify these critical source areas? Of course, when they're closer to a stream, they have a lot more potential to move sediment and nutrients off of those sites. You know, so usually we're trying to target, you know, buffers of some sort in those areas, or you know, floodplain easements or something like that. There's a lot of things that we can do on those sites, but trying to target those right practices in the right locations. And then this other piece of, hit on this a little bit before, the agricultural conservation planning framework. And again, I like this, the soil health as the base of the pyramid, you know, trying to make sure that that is, we're protecting our soil as much as possible, getting that infiltration that we can, and then the water that does move, that does escape, that does get away from that, how we're going to control that within the field. And that's with that controlled drainage water management, or grass waterways, or filter strips. And then once it moves off of that, how we're going to control it below the fields or field edge. And so that's where wetlands might come in, or other impoundments. And then what are we going to do with within the riparian management, and that might be two-stage ditches and that. So there's other things that we can do there, but just trying to make sure we think about all those things. And obviously going to be obviously just thinking about the you know, the importance of the systems on here. We've done an awesome job of getting the covers out there, the cover crops, getting up to 1 million acres. You know, how do we find that next 500,000 acres, that next 1 million acres? You know, and I think about this, and we've worked so hard to get to 1 million acres and sustain 1 million acres, and we're at just barely a little under 10% of our cropland. And you go out and see some of the Mississippi River Basin initiatives, and they talk about the things that need to be done for water quality improvements, and they're talking about 40% of the cropland needs to be in cover crops. And whenever they say that, I just pound my fist on my forehead, like 40%. I mean, we've worked so hard, and we've gotten the early adopters, and we're at 10%, you know. And don't get me wrong, it's so, when you look back at these numbers, you know, where we were at, you know, 10, 15 years ago, and it's like, man, we've come a long way, but yet, how do we get a few more? How do we get a few more to try it? And don't get me, I know you're trying out there, but how do we get this out, message this to farmers and landowners? And then we just know this resilience piece of it, you know, this back in 2012 from you know, good friend Mike Plummer, long-term tillage plots. He had no-till on all of those, and one with cover crops, one without cover crops. And that one with the cover crops was 80 bushels an acre more in 2012. You know, that was $540 more. And so this is one of those times where, you know, what was a nitrate savings that we pulled out that wasn't lost, but at the same time, what was the productivity, you know, on that? I mean, I paid for years on that. So again, how do we, you know, keep showing these pieces and get farmers to also try and utilize these practices and pull them into their systems and dip their toes in them, you know? And I still think there's a lot of cases we need to try and promote cover crops ahead of high residue planting systems. We've got to get that soil biology ramped up, ready for that residue that we're just going to flop out on the soil surface. We get these cover crops going for 3 years prior to flipping to no-till or strip-till. We've got that biology ready to break down all the residue that we're now going to leave on the surface. So I've said it before. I think that's something we missed in late 80s, early 90s, and we were promoting no-till. If at that time we'd been promoting cover crops, don't get me wrong, we got lots of benefits from the no-till, but get these systems to work better, I think we need to continue to explore that. And then with that, that water infiltration, you know, that soil health matters. Are we sure that 1 inch of rain infiltrates the soil where it lands? Are we sure that the water is infiltrating where it lands? Would that raindrop to be there and not end up somewhere else? We know those various impacts of downstream water quality, water quantity, on flooding, on Lake Erie, epoxy issues in the Gulf. All those things tie together. And I think that's why we just so strongly feel that, you know, doing what we can, continuing what we're attempting to do with improving our soil health addresses so many of these things. And don't get me wrong, we don't always see immediate impacts on some of these. You know, year 1, year 2, year 3 is slow, it's sluggish. The system is, we don't see all these benefits. Years 5, we see more. Years 10, we start stacking these practices on top of each other. The whole system works better. They also work better as far as addressing our resources. So continue to go forth and promote those. And at the same time, keeping those practices that we have at our disposal. You know, over the years, longer ago, I poo-pooed the grass waterways a bit. But at the same time, the sediment that happens in that gully, 100% of that is delivered off-site. You could argue a little bit of it might not be, but almost all of that is delivered off-site. So we still have to keep putting on those grass waterways, and we still need to have those other practices in place. Don't get me wrong, I think we need to have the no-till and cover crops there to help those practices work better, last longer, especially as we have more extreme weather events that press all of this, press this whole system. We have to have this whole suite of practices. And so trying to include everything at our disposal to try and make this work. So things from today, wrapping up. Precipitation happens. We want to try and do what we can to infiltrate more of that precipitation into the soil. We want to store more of that water on the landscape for a longer period for all the variety of reasons. We want to make sure we're doing what we can to build resiliency of our soils, our water holding capacity to weather extreme events. And doing what we can to get those producers, those landowners, to develop their plans, to make seasonal, yearly tweaks and improvements. What things do they want to do on their own? Which things do they want to receive cost share for? And then with all of that, how do we improve our soil and water use efficiencies? How do we decrease the erosion, build soil organic matter, water holding capacity, all those things that we know intricately that we need to continue to do, but how all of those things impact water management, from drainage to irrigation to sediment to our water bodies. All these things are so intertwined. And that was one of the challenges, you know, that so many of these things are so intertwined. How do you split them apart as for a training session or a discussion on some of this? And some of it split apart easier and some did not, and some stacked on top. So thank you very much for your patience, for working with us. Sorry I haven't seen all the other comments going on. Please.
The last few comments, Tony, have been good, but not related too much to the information that you've discussed here today. But just, you know, the importance of having amazing conservation planners working with our farmers every day. That's what I got from the chat. So.
Yep, all very true. Y'all do a great job out there. Don't let the devil in the details of the other things bog you down. You know, go spend some time in soil health, build your morale back up, or whatever those things you need to do.
All right, so I have a couple more polls, Tony.
Okay.
Would you like me to launch those?
Yep.
So the next two polls coming up, they're actually quizzes. So when you submit your response, it'll actually give you the correct answer. And this one should have probably been brought up during the sedimentation presentation, but according to the 2020 ICP accomplishments report, what were the sediment load reductions from the conservation practices installed in the 2020 calendar year? So I think this is a really, again, amazing thing to think about. You know, our ICP, that annual partnership report that's put out there, there's a lot of great information in there. So we're getting some responses coming through. And as people are responding, I'm going to paste something in the chat box again. Good answers, everyone. So if you notice, the image that I paste in the chat box comes from the ICP report, and it talks about 1,076,400 tons of sediment were saved from entering Indiana's waterways. And that's from conservation practices that were installed or applied in the year 2020. So again, just, you know that the work that you are doing has an impact, and we see that benefit. I also did put into the chat box a link to the 2020 ICP accomplishments report. I'm sure you've all seen that, but you know, if you haven't, there it is. All right, Tony, the next one I'm going to launch actually has to do with sediment again. And this question is asking the planners, according to the 2020 ICP accomplishments report, what watershed kept the most sediment from entering their watercourse in 2020 with the installed conservation practices? So that isn't practices that have been maintained from previous installation. It's just looking at the sediment reductions from practices installed in 2020. And these are Huck 8 watersheds. So again, I kind of tried to look through watersheds across the state, and so when I submitted that information. So looks like we're getting responses here. People are putting the information in. Try to pick watersheds from all parts of the state. So as you're submitting it, you're seeing that the correct response was the Lower White watershed. And I do have a, let's see here. I think I have. It should be in the accomplishments reports. I thought I had the link for it here, but all of a sudden, as I'm scrolling through, I think I might have lost it. So if I find it, I'll paste it into the chat screen. But just know that that is there, and that the Lower White watershed was the watershed that saw the largest reduction in sediment from practices in 2020. Let's see here. I think the second to last quiz question I have here has to do with Indiana's largest natural water body. I heard You know, I heard Tony name dropping reservoirs and lakes and all these other things like that. So so we pulled up a quiz question having to do with Indiana's largest natural water body, and the caveat is within the boundaries of the state. So things like Lake Michigan doesn't count. But anyway, here's just a few lists of lakes. And all of you Hoosiers know your lakes well from the responses that I'm seeing, right? That a lot of the lakes are actually reservoirs, but that Lake Wawasee is our largest lake in the state. And thank you, Mike Hughes. I was just going to add that lake. I can't even say that one. Maxinkuckee. Thank you. Is the second largest natural water body in the state. So some amazing water resources here in our state. And then lastly, this is more just a fun way to close out our day, thinking about our favorite activities in Indiana's waters. And one of the things that we did not put in there, Tony, is ice fishing. But I don't think that happens a lot in Indiana. But you know, most of our activities have to do with open waters and more summertime. So we're hearkening back to a warmer day in Indiana, although today is pretty nice out.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. We forgot ice fishing. There's probably something else we forgot too. So
looks like we have a lot of naturalists out there with kayaking and canoes.
Yeah, drowning fishing worms is another good one. So I should have put artificial bait on there too, but I guess you can't really drown artificial bait. But
yeah, that's very true.
All right. Well,
I don't see any other questions from anybody. I'll just kind of look through these again. No questions at all. So Tony, I think the floor is yours. You can close her out, and we can end our day. Or we'll not end the day, end the training.
Yeah, well,
that's it. I'm checking out. I'm done.
Whatever you might do. But anyways, appreciate everyone's time. So I think Shannon will stop the recording here in a little bit. We will get this submitted and hopefully get everyone added on there for AgLearn for this requirement, and hopefully picked up some other information out of it, some other thoughts on it too. Hope the rest of the year goes well, and happy holidays, and we'll hopefully see you at a meeting sometime soon in the near future. With that, I think we'll